In May 1498, the Dominican friar Girolamo Savonarola was executed in the center of Florence. The city's republican government was left scrambling to fill the resulting power vacuum and stabilize its administrative ranks. A month later, they appointed 29-year-old Niccolo Machiavelli as the head of the Second Chancery. He had no prior political experience. Operating out of the Palazzo Vecchio, the Chancery and its affiliated committee, the Ten of Liberty and Peace, managed the Republic's foreign diplomacy and military affairs. Machiavelli was suddenly reviewing intelligence from across the Italian peninsula and Europe. This mid-level desk job provided a clear view of the structural vulnerabilities that threatened the survival of the Florentine state. His education moved quickly from paperwork to field observation. In 1500, he was dispatched on a diplomatic mission to the court of King Louis XII. There, he observed a heavily centralized absolute monarchy. Compared to France's massive administrative apparatus and unified military, the fractured Florentine Republic appeared fragile. 2 years later, he traveled to the Romagna region to negotiate with Caesar Borgia, the ambitious son of Pope Alexander VI. He watched as Borgia lured his mutinous mercenary captains to Senigallia, having them methodically executed to pacify the region. This diagram illustrates the efficiency Machiavelli identified in Borgia's methods. While other lords struggled with constant rebellions, Borgia's decisive force established a lasting administrative order in the Romagna. Machiavelli defined this competence as virtù, the skill to manipulate circumstances and secure the state through any necessary means. These observations shifted Machiavelli's approach to diplomacy. He treated the survival of the Republic as a technical problem governed by observable data and the clinical application of power. Returning to Florence, he applied this cold logic to the military. The Italian city-states traditionally outsourced their wars to condottieri, professional mercenary captains. This chart compares the staggering contracts paid to mercenaries against their low loyalty, a constant drain on the treasury. Expanding into a battle timeline reveals a fatal flaw. As casualties mount, allegiance fractures. They frequently flee or switch sides rather than dying for a paycheck. Machiavelli proposed a radical, data-driven cure, a native citizen militia. He argued that local men defending their own land would stand firm where mercenaries broke. He spent years training peasants into disciplined infantry squares. In 1509, this citizen army successfully forced the surrender of the rebel city of Pisa. The victory validated his core theory. Civic loyalty and coordinated discipline proved highly effective against the experience of hired fighters. 3 years later, the experiment faced a much harsher test. A coalition of Spanish and papal forces marched on Tuscany to restore the Medici to power. Machiavelli's militia of farmers and draftees was forced to hold the fortified town of Prato against battle-hardened Spanish professionals. The Florentine lines collapsed. The Spanish troops breached the walls, decimated the militia, and sacked Prato. Days later, the Florentine Republic surrendered. The returning Medici immediately dismantled the Republican government. Machiavelli was stripped of his titles, fined heavily, and banned from leaving the territory. He had accurately diagnosed the military weakness of the Italian states and prescribed the correct cure. But structural insight alone was not enough to halt the overwhelming force of a foreign empire. The situation deteriorated further in February 1513. Authorities uncovered an anti-Medici conspiracy led by Pietro Paolo Boscoli and Agostino Capponi. Machiavelli's name appeared on a list of suspected sympathizers. He was thrown into prison and subjected to the strappato, a torture method that dislocates the shoulders by dropping the victim by their bound wrists. He endured it for 3 weeks, denying any involvement. Granted amnesty upon the election of Pope Leo X, he was released and banished to his rural farm at Sant'Andrea, entering total political exile. Stripped of his office, his income, and his physical mobility, he was left with nothing but his observations. Isolation forced him to sympathize the cold mechanics of power he had witnessed in the Chancery. In letters to his friends, he described his evenings. After a day managing his farm, he would strip off his mud-stained clothes, put on the robes he once wore to foreign courts, and read the ancient historians. He combined these classical studies with his 14 years of diplomatic field data. The result was a short, ruthlessly practical manuscript titled De Principatibus, known today as The Prince. Scholars still debate his true motive. Some read it as a desperate job application to the Medici, others as a satirical warning about the mechanics of tyranny, and some as a genuine manual for uniting Italy against foreign invaders. Regardless of his intent, the text separated politics from traditional morality, offering rulers a clinical guide to acquiring and maintaining authority. He spent his career trying to save a republic that ultimately fell, yet by documenting exactly why it collapsed, Machiavelli built the foundation for the modern study of statecraft. History remembers him as the devil's tutor, the man who wrote the ultimate manual for tyrants. But the real Niccolò Machiavelli spent his most productive years hidden away from the halls of power, walking through private, overgrown gardens. Behind the ruthless reputation was a man who actually despised absolute rule. He was a dedicated, unyielding republican who believed power belonged to the citizens, not a monarch. After being exiled from the Florentine government, he found refuge at the Orti Orsolari, the Rucellai family gardens. Here, a circle of exiled intellectuals and former statesmen gathered to debate classical literature and the mechanics of free societies. It was in these meetings that he produced his truest ideological work, the Discourses on Livy, a comprehensive defense of the Roman Republic. He was a man harboring deeply radical, anti-aristocratic beliefs, trapped in a Florence completely controlled by the autocratic Medici family. To survive, he had to keep his political allegiance confined to the shadows of the garden. In the Discourses, he proposed an idea that shocked his contemporaries. He argued that total social harmony is actually dangerous. He believed that domestic conflict is the true engine of civic liberty. He called this concept tumulti. Looking back at ancient Rome, he observed that the relentless friction between the wealthy elites and the working plebeians was exactly what kept the republic vibrant and free from tyranny. He categorized the world into two distinct social appetites: the elite's aggressive impulse to dominate and the people's defensive impulse to remain free. When these forces collide, the friction crystallizes into balanced laws and protective institutions, like the Roman tribunes. This idea broke completely from classical philosophy. Thinkers from Plato to Cicero had always insisted that a strong state required absolute unity and the elimination of factions. By arguing that an armed, agitated, and active collective was the safest foundation for a government, he terrified the aristocratic elites. He was writing a blueprint for populist power, ensuring he would remain a political outsider. By 1520, the isolation of exile had become unbearable. He viewed active political service as essential to his existence, and he desperately wanted a way back into the Florentine government. To get there, he made a calculated compromise. He accepted a lucrative commission from Giulio de' Medici, the very family that had dismantled his beloved republic, to write the official Florentine histories. This assignment forced him into a dangerous tightrope walk. He practiced dissimulation, carefully burying his pro-republican critiques inside layers of flattering prose, so he wouldn't offend his wealthy patrons. The strain of this deception weighed heavily on him. In a letter to his friend Francesco Guicciardi, he confessed, "For a long time I have not said what I believed, nor do I ever believe what I say." The man who mapped the mechanics of power had to sacrifice his own ideological purity, choosing to wrap his truths in lies just to maintain a presence in Florentine society. In May 1527, imperial troops sacked Rome. The shockwaves hit Florence immediately, and the Medici regime collapsed overnight. Florentine citizens seized the moment, expelled the remaining authorities, and eagerly re-established a democratic republic. Seeing his lifelong dream realized, he rushed to the Palazzo della Signoria. He stood before the new Democratic Assembly and petitioned to get his old secretarial job back. But the Assembly looked at his recent history, his paid commissions, and his dedications to autocratic rulers, and rejected him entirely. They saw him not as a fellow Republican, but as a compromised Medici stooge. The rejection broke him. His health failed rapidly, and surrounded by a few close friends, he passed away just weeks after the republic he idolized had turned him away. The man who codified the mechanics of political survival was himself outmaneuvered. In the end, the strategist who taught the world how to navigate shifting tides was swept away by the unpredictable current of his own life. Almost immediately after his death, the nuances of his life were erased. Political enemies stripped his writings of their context and weaponized his words. By 1559, the Catholic Church placed his entire body of work on the Index of Forbidden Books, condemning him as a subverter of justice and an enemy of religion. Soon after, a Huguenot lawyer named Innocent Gentilet published a massive attack, claiming that the Italian advisors to the French crown had used his writings to orchestrate the bloody St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. This intense pan-European propaganda campaign succeeded. It buried the pragmatic Republican and replaced him with a cartoonish villain, giving birth to the term Machiavellian. The narrative shifted again during the Enlightenment, when philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Denis Diderot tried to rescue his reputation. They proposed that his most infamous book was never meant to be a manual for tyrants. Instead, they argued it was an undercover satire, a deliberate effort to expose the ruthless crimes of ruling monarchs to the public. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the debate fractured further. Academic battle lines were drawn between neoconservative scholars focusing on his realism and civic Republicans emphasizing his theories on liberty. More recently, a plebeian populist interpretation has emerged. Thinkers like Antonio Gramsci reclaimed his focus on the working masses, viewing his theories as early strategies for organizing the oppressed against the elite. Today, these competing schools of thought continue to fight over his texts. His ghost is constantly drafted into almost every major political ideology of the modern world. 5 centuries later, the Ghost War remains unresolved. He is claimed by revolutionaries and reactionaries alike, precisely because his work refuses to offer an easy resolution. He remains the unblinking eye of political science, not for providing answers, but because he forced us to look at conflict without flinching.